Every day, Melanie woke up in the quiet, sterile light of dawn. The sun was just beginning its ascent, casting soft, golden rays through the bedroom window, but the bed next to hers was empty. Her husband, once a presence beside her, was nowhere to be found. She rolled out of bed, the weight of sleepless nights pressing on her like a heavy quilt, leaving dark bags under her eyes. She could feel them more than see them, persistent reminders of the exhaustion she couldn't shake off. She shuffled into the bathroom, brushing her teeth with robotic precision, the cool minty taste barely cutting through the fog of fatigue clouding her mind. She spent exactly 2 minutes using the restroom, the routine too familiar to change. Her fingers moved automatically, gathering her hair into a quick, messy bun, her bunny hairstyle, as she called it, before she walked toward the kitchen, the hum of the house around her like a backdrop to her life. By 6:45, she was already in the kitchen, chopping, stirring, and frying. The rhythmic sounds of cooking became her soundtrack for the morning, the clink of utensils against pans and the sizzle of food meeting hot oil filling the silence of the house. By 7 o'clock on the dot, the meal was ready, hot plates set out for the family, although the table often seemed empty, even when full. She waited for the sound of little feet padding down the hall, the voices of her son stirring from his dreams. He needed to be ready for school. The morning rushed by in a blur of packed lunches, tying shoelaces, and reminders to brush teeth. The car ride to school felt like a mechanical part of the day, the same words spoken, the same conversations played out, schedules, homework, the weather. After she dropped him off, the car drove back to an empty house, and Melanie would finally let herself breathe. She headed straight for the living room, where she could close her eyes and just be. 30 minutes of meditation, her only escape. The silence offered some peace, but even that was fleeting. Then came the housework. Scrubbing, dusting, folding, arranging. She was always moving, always cleaning, always organizing. The house was tidy, but it never felt finished. It was just the same endless cycle: mop the floor, wipe the counters, take out the trash. When she finished, she would sink onto the couch, her body aching for rest. She'd turn on the TV, zoning out to whatever show was on for an hour, her thoughts wandering. Sometimes, her mind would drift far away, wondering what it would be like to be anyone else. It wasn't that she hated her life, it was that she was living it on repeat. She'd watch people on TV, pretending to be the carefree, adventurous souls they portrayed. She wanted to be one of them, living with joy, discovering new things, feeling alive in ways she couldn't remember anymore. She longed to feel the excitement of being a mother for the first time, or learning how to play an instrument, or the pride of buying her first home all on her own. She missed the uncertainty, the thrill of not knowing what was next. The messiness of emotions, both the good and the bad, that made life feel real. Sometimes, she would sit there, wishing for change, wishing for something to break the routine. She thought maybe a challenge, a problem to solve, a devil to confront, would give her the spark of life she was missing. But instead, the days just bled into one another, a blur of monotony. It was like a meal that was undercooked, unfinished and unsatisfying. She could never pinpoint what it was, but there was always this heaviness in her chest, this strange peace mixed with emptiness. And then one evening, just as the world outside began to dim, something happened. Something unexpected. Melanie woke up to the most unusual and strangely beautiful scent filling the air around her. Something delicate, like a little blue jay fluttering through a field of lilies, light and airy. There was a hint of something deeper, though, Hennessy, smooth and rich, paired with jasmine's sweet, fragrant touch. But then, there was a third note, one that didn't belong to her. It wasn't masculine, but unmistakably feminine, wafting from the side of the bed where her husband had lain just hours before. She tried not to overthink it, pushing the thought to the back of her mind. Maybe it was just a new perfume she had been trying out, one of the many she'd bought on a whim. Maybe it was nothing. She rolled out of bed and went through her daily routine like a well-oiled machine. Brush teeth, pull her hair into a quick bunny, and shuffle to the kitchen. There was no time to waste. It wasn't until later that day, though, that things began to unravel. Driving toward her son Timothy's school, her eyes fell on something that made her pulse quicken. Parked outside an expensive restaurant was her husband's car. Her heart dropped as she turned the wheel instinctively, pulling her car to the curb. The license plate. His license plate. She looked again, hoping it was a coincidence, but there was no mistaking it. It was definitely his car. She fought the tremor in her hands as she peered through the windows, searching for him. And then she saw them. He was sitting at a table with Tina. The one she had tried to convince herself was just a work colleague in her mind. But there was no denying it now. Tina's hand was casually resting on his arm, their fingers occasionally brushing as she laughed at something he said. And as the scene unfolded, Melanie could see it all. The intimacy, the familiarity, the comfort they shared that Melanie had never felt in their own marriage. The betrayal was as clear as day. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her head, but they all seemed jumbled, nonsensical. She thought of walking in there, confronting them, surprising them both, exposing the truth right in front of their eyes. Maybe she could force him to choose. But she didn't move. Instead, she told herself a story, a lie to soften the reality. This was nothing. It's just a work thing. He'll be back home tonight. It's just a fling. It doesn't matter. Her thoughts swirled as she drove away, unable to tear her eyes from the rearview mirror. She parked outside Timothy's school long before she needed to, the minutes stretching into an agonizing, empty silence. She sat there, still and quiet, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. Her mind was a battlefield. She was torn between two voices, the voice of reason and the voice of doubt. One voice whispered, "He comes back to you every night. He built a life with you, a family. You've made a home together. He's not going to leave you. Everything will be okay." It was the voice she had always clung to, the one that made her think that maybe, just maybe, things would work themselves out. But then, there was the other voice. The one that felt sharper, more brutal. "Are you a fool? Don't you see? You're the silver goose. Without you, he's nothing. He'd be lost without you. But his pride has made him forget that. He'll lose everything for this. He's already lost it." The words felt like knives in her mind. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, but it didn't stop the tears from falling. Tears that weren't of rage or sorrow, but of something deeper, an empty numbness. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't even sad. She just didn't feel anything at all. It was as if the love had long since drained out of her, leaving behind only the remnants of obligation, the weight of routine. Somewhere, deep down, she realized the truth. She didn't love him anymore. Not in the way she had once thought she did. But there was something else too. She had a son. Timothy needed a father. He needed stability, a family, a home that didn't feel broken. Melanie sat there in her car, the harsh sunlight streaming through the windshield, and wondered if she was just going to keep playing this part, pretending everything was fine, for the sake of a child who deserved more than just survival. Could she keep living this lie? Could she continue to be his wife, his partner, when the very foundation of their marriage was crumbling? Her breath was shallow, as the weight of the choice pressed down on her like the heavy, suffocating air of the summer afternoon. Timothy opened the car door, sliding into the back seat, his school bag slung over his shoulder. He started talking immediately, the words spilling out in rapid-fire sentences, animated as he recounted his day at school. His voice, full of youthful energy, seemed to fill the space between them. "Mom, you wouldn't believe what happened today. We had this huge science project, and I was actually able to explain everything without messing up. Everyone was super impressed, even Mr. Collins." He rambled on, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and excitement. But his mother wasn't really listening. Her mind was elsewhere. Her gaze was fixed ahead, eyes not really seeing the road. She nodded absently, offering a quick, "That's nice, baby," as her thoughts drifted. As Timothy continued, unaware of her distraction, her mind replayed fragments of the past. She remembered the early years of their relationship, the hope, the promises. How long had it been since they had fallen out of love? Years. She wasn't sure anymore. It felt like an eternity had passed, and now here they were, stuck in a routine, pretending. Had it all been a facade? A performance they'd been putting on for each other? For Timothy? The weight of it hit her, the realization that what she thought was a happy family was really a house of mirrors, reflecting a life they both outgrew. She'd been so focused on protecting Timothy, thinking she was keeping him safe from a broken home, but the truth was she was only trapping him in a home without foundation. A house with no walls, no real structure, no real love left to hold it together. She glanced at the rearview mirror, meeting her own eyes for a fleeting second, then turning back to Timothy's animated chatter. "That's nice, baby," she repeated softly, as if the words were a reflex rather than an answer. She drove them both home in silence after that, lost in her thoughts as he continued talking, unaware of the storm brewing in her mind. When they got home, she walked him to the door, her hand gently resting on his shoulder as he went inside to start his homework. The weight of the day's realizations hung heavy on her chest. She turned toward the kitchen, trying to push away the thoughts, focusing on the routine, preparing dinner. She chopped vegetables mechanically, the knife cutting through the silence, but her mind wasn't on the meal. She couldn't stop thinking, what if I left? What would happen to everything they had built? Would it all just disappear, swept away because of some woman who had distracted him? The thought gnawed at her, and a sense of desperation crept in. She left the cutting board and walked to the wall where the phone hung. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing the receiver. A deep breath, then she grabbed it and dialed the number of an old contact. The man who always knew what was going on behind the scenes, someone who had a knack for getting dirt on people, especially people in the public eye. She had never asked him for a favor like this before, but now, she needed answers. She needed to know everything about him, everything he was hiding. The phone rang, and when the line connected, she spoke quietly, almost coldly. "I need a favor," she said, her voice firm. "I'll pay you $400 every 24 hours if you can get me anything on him. I need to know everything. Nothing too small, nothing too insignificant. Whatever you can find, I'll pay." The conversation was brief, but the weight of it was heavier than any words could express. She hung up, staring at the phone for a long moment. What had she just set in motion? The following day, she found herself in a familiar routine, but rather than fixating on the television, her gaze shifted to the telephone, anticipation building as she waited for a call from a contact she hadn't heard from in ages. Little did she know, he was embroiled in a different pursuit altogether. He was parked outside Joseph's workplace, eyes glued to the entrance, patiently awaiting his exit. For nearly 3 hours, he lingered there, equipped with an old camera and a well-worn notebook, ready to document every detail of what unfolded before him. Just then, a sleek black minivan pulled up, and to his astonishment, Joseph climbed inside, accompanied by the same enigmatic woman Melanie had described during their last conversation. Heart racing, he snapped a photograph, disbelief washing over him as he processed the scene. He had always viewed Joseph as an upstanding family man, someone without any hidden, devilish secrets lurking within the confines of his home. Determined to unravel the truth, he maneuvered his car to follow them, keeping a safe distance to avoid detection. He finally pulled over at a gas station, careful to maintain a low profile. Slipping on a hoodie to disguise himself, he slipped out of the car and began to walk, surveying his surroundings before approaching Joseph's house. As he stealthily navigated past the charming suburban home, he discreetly raised his camera, keenly capturing images of what lay beyond the glass. Through the window of the tastefully decorated upstairs master bedroom, he caught a glimpse of a couple, lost in their own world, twirling and spinning with joyous abandon. Their laughter floated through the air, illuminated by the warm, golden hues of the setting sun. The sight of the woman, her eyes sparkling like stars as she gracefully fell into her partner's embrace, struck him like a bolt of lightning. It was a beautiful scene that made his heart ache with conflicting emotions. Meanwhile, in the cozy living room below, the couple's children played with boundless energy, their innocent laughter resonating as they built towers with colorful blocks, completely oblivious to the turmoil unfolding just beyond their horizon. As he continued to document every detail, he realized that the situation was far more intricate than he had ever anticipated. This was not just a fleeting affair, it was a deep-seated betrayal, a treacherous lie that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their lives. Observing the joyful moment, he noted that the children were likely the same age as Melanie's son, possibly even sharing the same birthday. The stark contrast between the woman in the house and Melanie was striking. Where one radiated vibrant warmth, the other seemed an echo of a different life. He began to move closer, merging into the comforting embrace of the nearby bushes as Joseph and Tina descended the stairs, preoccupied with preparing a meal for the unsuspecting children. With one final click of the shutter, he captured the last piece of evidence he would need to confront the truth. His heart raced as he dashed back to his car parked at the gas station, breathless and filled with a mix of disbelief and determination. He jumped into the vehicle, turned the key in the ignition, and sped away, shaking his head in disbelief at the unfolding drama he had just witnessed. Arriving at Melanie's gated apartment building, he approached her door, clutching the weighty file containing 5 pages of incriminating information and 17 damning photographs. Knocking firmly, he steeled himself and handed her the file, a heavy burden of truth. As he felt the weight of the moment, he lowered his gaze and uttered his final words, a simple and sorrowful apology, before turning away and walking into the night. She closed the door behind her with a resolute thud, a barrier against the chaos that threatened to engulf her. As she wrestled with the stack of photographs, her heart raced, thumping like a battle drum in her chest, echoing the turmoil in her mind. With trembling fingers stained by anxiety, she flipped through each image, each one a cruel reminder of her shattered reality. Overwhelmed by a surge of heartbreak, she flung the damning evidence to the floor. As the photos scattered, her face twisted in anguish, and a piercing scream escaped her lips, a raw, desperate sound that reverberated through the walls, signaling the painful awakening to the fact that her world had been irrevocably torn apart. In that moment of despair, she felt her son Timothy's presence, as he stumbled sleepily from his room, his small form illuminated only by the faint light of the hallway. He rushed over to her, concern etched on his innocent face. "Mommy, are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling with worry. Tears coursed down Melanie's cheeks, cascading like an endless river of sorrow. She felt utterly weak, as if she were a fragile pebble cast aside by fate, consumed by feelings of betrayal that gnawed at her soul like a relentless predator. Thoughts whirled in her mind, chaotic and tumultuous, splitting her consciousness apart like thunderclouds in a raging storm. Timothy, sensing his mother's distress, clasped her hand tightly, offering his small warmth as a lifeline. They lingered in that moment, hours slipping away as he gradually succumbed to sleep, his head nestled against her side on the worn couch. With every breath, she felt the weight of her sorrow press down on her, the tears that once flowed now dried up, leaving her with puffy, red-eyed reflections of despair. All she could ponder was the daunting question of what to do next. Should she gather Timothy's belongings and vanish, escaping the nightmare, or allow him to walk in thwart that door, accepting the comforting lie he might tell her? But the choice was slipping from her grasp. The sound of jangling keys pierced the silence, a harbinger of inevitable confrontation. The door creaked open, and Joseph stepped inside, shutting the door behind him with an almost surgical precision. He noticed Timothy, curled up and sleeping peacefully on the couch. With a measured smile, he crouched down, his curiosity masked by a facade of warmth. "Why is he asleep on the couch?" he asked softly, a single question ringing out in the tension-filled air. Melanie turned her head, her expression mechanical, exhaustion clouding her thoughts as the unbearable question that had haunted her for hours now loomed large in her mind, ready to burst forth. Melanie spoke in a fragile yet resolute tone, her voice quivering slightly but cutting through the tension of the room. "What's her name?" Joseph, taken aback, pulled himself upright, a puzzled expression twisting his features as he tried to grasp her question. "What are you talking about?" She gently laid Timothy's small head to the side, loosening her grip on his tiny hand. With a determined stride, she walked toward the file on the table, her heart racing as she tossed the photographs directly at Joseph. "The black woman and her 2 kids, or should I say your 2 kids?" she accused, stepping closer to him, her eyes blazing with a mix of hurt and betrayal. Joseph picked up one of the glossy photos, his hand trembling with frustration as he flung it to the ground between them. "She's a work colleague. You're losing your mind." "I just helped pick her kids up from school," he protested, desperation creeping into his voice. Melanie's expression shifted from anger to disbelief as she stepped back, cradling her hands in her hair. It was as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear, the reality of his lies finally crashing down upon her. She turned away from him, her back rigid with tension. "Okay, that's the game you want to play. Then we'll play it," she spat, taking a seat nearby as the anguish began to etch itself into her features. Joseph, feeling the walls closing in, retreated into the bedroom, sitting down with his hands to his head. He was overpowered by a whirlwind of thoughts. How had the situation spiraled so out of control? How had Melanie discovered his secret about Tina? The realization that their lives were now intertwined in this tangled mess loomed heavily over him. The story was out, and there was no going back. Each moment stretched out like a taut wire, threatening to snap at any moment. The clock ticked toward 3:30 a.m., the stillness of the house thick like a shroud, the silence punctuated only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the soft hum of the refrigerator. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, Joseph lay on the bed, his body sprawled out in an unnatural yet vulnerable way, as if he were a man broken by exhaustion. His limbs were splayed wide across the mattress, a tangled mess of skin and fabric. The warmth of the blankets cocooned him, but it wasn't enough to shield him from the darkness that seemed to grow thicker by the hour. His breathing was slow, shallow, a rhythm of peacefulness that was anything but, given the events that had been unfolding in the house. He had been running on fumes for days now. His body had shut down, succumbing to the weight of fatigue, the psychological toll too much for him to bear. And so he slept, unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. The door creaked open, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. Melanie entered, her body moving with purpose but also with the same heaviness that had been weighing on her for hours. She hadn't slept. There had been no rest, only shadows creeping into her mind, urging her toward this moment. The pull of her own dark thoughts had led her here. Every step was a struggle, her limbs moving as though they were made of stone, each motion reminding her of the strain of holding herself together. She walked across the room toward the safe, silent, deliberate. Her hands were trembling as she fumbled for the combination, her fingers cold, slick with sweat. The code was burned into her memory, a number sequence she had memorized long ago, but tonight it felt more like a curse than anything else. She keyed in the 4 digits with precision, though her mind was clouded, her heart pounding in her chest like a wild animal trapped inside a cage. The safe clicked open with a soft mechanical sound that echoed in the stillness of the room, and she hesitated for just a moment, staring into the cold, dark interior. Her fingers brushed against the cold, metal surface of the gun. It felt heavier than she remembered, its weight pressing down on her as though it were a physical manifestation of the decision she had already made in her mind. Her body seemed to weaken further as her hand wrapped around the handle, as if the gun was pulling the strength out of her, leaving only emptiness. She closed the safe slowly, the metallic thud of the door closing resonating in the silence. Her breath hitched as she turned, the weight of the weapon in her hands a tangible reminder of the irreversible path she was about to walk down. She could hear her own heartbeat, pounding loudly in her ears, the sound a drumbeat that only made the air feel thicker. Every step felt like she was wading through molasses, but still, she moved, approaching the bed where Joseph lay unaware, his body spread out, vulnerable, and completely at peace in his sleep. As she stood over him, she felt a chill run through her. Her vision blurred, her fingers tightening around the gun as her breath grew ragged. She hesitated for just a moment, just long enough for doubt to flicker in her chest. But it was fleeting. The darkness inside her, the sickness that had been eating at her for so long, surged forward, drowning out everything else. With a slow, almost methodical motion, she raised the gun, the cold barrel pointing directly at Joseph's sleeping form. Her heart was racing now, but her hands remained steady. This was the moment. There was no going back. Joseph stirred slightly, the faintest movement in his sleep, his face contorting as though he was having a dream or a nightmare. He didn't wake, his breath still even, unaware of the danger that hung just inches from him. Melanie's mind screamed at her to stop, to put the gun down and walk away. But it was too late. The pull of what she had already decided was too powerful. Her finger pressed gently on the trigger. But before she could pull it fully, there was a soft rustle from the couch, the sound of movement. Joseph's eyes fluttered open, barely registering the danger as they slowly focused on his surroundings. He blinked a few times, groggy from the heavy sleep, but then his gaze settled on her, standing there in the dim light, the gun still raised and ready. His brain slowly caught up, and in that instant, the confusion melted away, replaced by a growing sense of dread. His eyes widened as his mind tried to process what was happening. He sat up slightly, the cold terror of the moment jolting him awake fully now. But it was too late. The gunshot rang out in the room, the deafening noise shattering the fragile silence. Timothy jumps from the couch, running over to the bedroom, and seeing his mother standing over his father. Covered in red splatter and a lack of regret, she turned her head to Timothy. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, not even knowing what to do. Timothy struggled to pull the words out of his mouth. He looked at his mom and said "Mom" as she put the gun to her head, and said sorry as she pulled the next trigger. Timothy let out a piercing scream, his voice echoing through the dimly lit room. The sound was filled with a mix of fear and disbelief, as if he had just witnessed something too shocking to comprehend. His eyes widened in terror, and his heart raced, each beat pounding in his chest like a tumultuous drum. Timothy's world collapsed around him. His body crumpled to the ground, his hands trembling as he tried to steady himself against the floor, his breath ragged and desperate. The weight of everything was too much, his mind spinning, his heart pounding. He had witnessed the impossible, felt the world itself shift, and now his entire existence felt like it was being torn apart. Eden. Eden. His voice cracked, the words a scream of anguish as he cried my name, his voice echoing through the empty, darkened space. In that moment, I appeared. I didn't need to move, didn't need to step forward. I materialized at the end of the hallway, my presence felt before it was seen. The shadows shifted around me, and the cold, empty air seemed to grow heavier. Timothy looked up, his tear-filled eyes locking onto mine, desperate for something, anything, that would explain the horror unfolding before him. His face was streaked with tears, the remnants of his shattered mind, and as his gaze met mine, his words came out with an unmistakable bitterness. "This is not my story." His voice was thick with anger and frustration, as if he were blaming everything but himself. I didn't feel pity for him. Not now, not after everything that had led to this moment. Timothy had done this to himself. He was the one who had rewritten his reality, who had bent the fabric of the universe to his will, and now he was paying the price. What did he think I was? A god who could simply erase the consequences of his actions? Did he believe that he could manipulate his life with no repercussions? Did he think that I could erase his sins as though they never happened? No, I couldn't help him. He was the one who had severed his connection to reality, the one who had altered his own existence. The power to rewrite the fabric of his world was within him, bound to his very flesh. All of my power, the same power that flowed through him, that shaped the reality he had warped, was his to command, his to wield. He had just forgotten that every action had a cost. Finally, I spoke, my voice cutting through the suffocating silence, each word heavy with the weight of truth. "You changed your story, Timothy," I began, my voice unwavering. "You made your birthday earlier than what it was. You changed your father's first name to Joseph as if it wasn't Ben. You rewrote your very existence, and now, this is the reality you live with." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. There was no going back. His reality had been shattered, remade in his own image, and this was the nightmare he had created. A reality far worse than your tiny brain could ever imagine, I added, the finality of my words lingering like an ominous cloud, ready to consume him. Timothy stood then, his body trembling with rage, his anger spilling over as his hand shot out in a sudden, violent motion. The apartment around us seemed to groan under the weight of his fury. Everything, the very world itself, began to twist and bend. Walls warped and cracked, the air thick with the tension of his power, and then everything flipped. The entire apartment turned upside down, defying all logic. The floor became the ceiling turned to the floor. The world was disintegrating under the force of his emotions, and I was hurled through the air, sent flying through the ceiling with a force that felt like being ripped apart at the seams. Timothy's cry, a guttural, primal sound, rang out like a death knell. It wasn't just a scream, it was a burst of raw, unfathomable power that tore through the very fabric of the universe. His voice, infused with all the rage, grief, and fear he had been carrying, erupted into a sonic blast that sent shockwaves across existence itself. The blast was so powerful that it spread outward, ripping through space itself, touching every star, every galaxy. It shattered everything. The universe, once a vast, beautiful array of endless possibility, collapsed under the intensity of his cry, turning to nothing. Stars exploded into nothingness, galaxies disintegrated into dust. The very essence of existence was eradicated in the wake of his fury. I felt it, too. The pull of it, the overwhelming power. But even I couldn't stop it. For a moment, everything was silence. The stars were gone, The galaxies turned to ash. There was nothing left. Just a black void. And in that void, there was only him and me. It was impossible to believe. One cry, one moment of unchecked rage, and the entire universe had been undone. The sheer magnitude of it all left me momentarily stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I had never imagined such destruction, not even in my wildest reach of power. Now, we were alone. The universe was gone, everything was erased in an instant, and there was only one thing left. One thing that had to be done. Timothy remained there, suspended in the void, the weight of his actions crashing down upon him. There was no escape from this. There was no other way. The darkness, that illness inside him, the dark force that had driven him to alter his fate, was all that remained. To break free, to escape this eternal nothingness, he would have to face the sickness within him, the very thing that had caused all of this. The only way out was to confront the darkness in his soul. Would he rise above it, or would he remain lost in the consequences of his own making? There was no other choice. No way back. Only forward, into the darkness.